Okay, welcome back to lecture on intangible assets, part two. So we left off talking about with tangible assets, the expense is referred to as depreciation expense, and with intangible assets, the expense is referred to as amortization expense. So the cost associated with intangible assets is called amortization expense. As I mentioned earlier, the theory is the same as depreciation expense, but for intangibles, it's called amortization expense. So how do we calculate it? Again, you're going to see it's very similar to how we calculated straight line depreciation when we talked about tangible assets. We're going to use the cost of the asset. With intangibles, typically there is no salvage value considered, meaning we don't have to take that into account when calculating amortization expense. And we're going to recognize the expense over the useful life of the intangible asset or the legal life of the intangible asset whichever is shorter. So whichever life is shorter, that's what we're going to use to calculate the amortization expense. So I'm going to go back up to this when we were talking about the categories of intangibles, and I said I would come back with some examples of what these types of assets are. So let's go back and talk about that for a second. For marketing related intangible assets, typically we're talking about trademarks and trade names as an intangible asset. An example would be that Nike swoosh that they've spent so much money paying people like Tiger Woods, LeBron James, and many, many, many other athletes to wear when they're performing, so that that swoosh, that trademark, becomes associated with Nike. Other examples might be the colored Apple computer with a bite taken out of it for Apple computer, the way Google spells its Google name, There's a whole host of them you could think of for your own products that you buy, but these are all trademarks, trade names these companies have developed, and no one else is allowed to use those trademarks or trade names without expressed written consent from these corporations, which they're never going to give, by the way, because they don't want somebody else ruining their reputation or anything else. So that's an example of a marketing-related intangible asset. A customer-related intangible asset, by way of example, would be customer lists. Those have a value. Companies spend a lot of time developing who's buying from them and how to contact them. A lot of companies sell those lists to other companies so they can in turn send you emails or send you mailings or send you a whole host of other ways to get in touch with you. Those are customer lists. Those are considered intangible assets. Artistic related intangible assets, an example of that would be copyrights. Companies have spent a fair amount of money developing little jingles, little sayings. One of my favorites is the most interesting man in the world, for Amstel. And some of these corporations have developed little jingles, little music that goes along with them. And again, you can probably think of plenty of examples in your own experiences of products, commercials you see on TV. These are all copyrights. You file for copyrights, and you get copyright protected, meaning no one else can use these. There are contract-related intangible assets. Good example of that are franchises. When you own a franchise like McDonald's, Burger King, oops, didn't spell McDonald's right. Guess I haven't gone there enough. In fact, I try to never go there. Etc. These are franchises. Another example, I suppose, the most, I think, profitable franchise in the world, last I read, was Subway. Anyway, when you own one of these businesses, you sign a franchise agreement over a number of years, and you agree to do business a certain way, have a certain look, sell certain products at certain prices. People buy franchises because they have a much higher success rate than just starting a business on your own, because these franchises have been tried and tested, and they know what works, they know what doesn't work, and you sign a franchise agreement and you pay them a fee to be able to use their name, etc. Anyway, another type of intangible asset category is technology related, and an example of that would be a patent. Companies file for patents. They have patent protection. It's why these drug companies are so anxious to get their drug out into the marketplace, because they have a patent that protects that, meaning you cannot produce that same drug using those same ingredients without their express written permission, which again, they're not going to give anyone. Sometimes people who develop machinery and equipment have a certain patent on what they do, so you can't reproduce that without their permission, which you're not going to get. So anyway, those are some examples of those categories of intangible assets. All right, so let's talk about how we record, how we account for amortization expense. So amortization expense is calculated by taking the cost of the intangible asset divided by the life of the asset. You know, very similar to straight line depreciation, except we're not taking into account salvage value. And that life, remember, is the shorter of the useful life or the legal life of that intangible asset. All right, let's do an example here like we like to do in class. Let's say that on January 1, 2013, company files and is granted a patent for whatever it is they're making. It cost, let's just say, for by way of example, $120,000. It has a 10-year legal life and a 15-year estimated useful life. Okay, so to calculate it, we're going to take $120,000, cost of the asset, divided by the shorter of the legal life or the useful life, 10 years. And we are then going to arrive at $12,000 a year. For amortization expense. Spelt it right there. Now, besides not having to consider salvage value, the other great thing about recognizing amortization expense is besides recognizing the expense, I can directly reduce the asset. I don't have to use a contra account like I did for accumulated depreciation. I can go ahead and directly reduce the asset, in this case, the patent. The other thing I want to say before we end this second segment is I might have some partial year amortization expense, just like I had partial year depreciation expense, if the asset was not purchased on January 1st. So, come on back for the third and final segment, and I'll show you on the balance sheet equation what this looks like. Do one more example, talk about a couple other things, and we'll be done. See you on the other side. Here's the Jeopardy tune to take you out. Do 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 do.